Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we had a little technical glitch on our end, but now we're looking good. And
Okay, great.
so I'll just when we admit everyone into the room, I'll just introduce the session, and I'll turn it right over to you.
Sounds good.
And it's Dr. Katie Beth McKinney
Yes, that's right.
from Boulanger Initiative.
Exactly right.
Okay, great. And in terms of questions, do you want? I think we pretty much have the chat to do questions if they want to do that, or how would you prefer to do that?
Yeah, questions in the chat is great. I also left some time at the end, hopefully, for questions as well, so we
Okay.
can have those happen
Okay,
if I
great.
don't talk too much.
Oh, it'll be fantastic, I'm sure. So, um,
I'll go ahead
okay,
and get the screen sharing set up now, if that's
okay,
okay, just to make sure I did that correctly. Can you see that okay?
I can.
Great. I'm going to do a sound check really quick, if that's all right. Let me find one with a clip. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Great. Fun. I'm hoping I got some composers in here that are new to people, as well as maybe a couple familiar faces, so that should be fun.
Oh, this is awesome.
I definitely know there were some new ones to me because I'm a horn player. So the organ and horn world does not always overlap. It doesn't not overlap, but
I'm trying to think. At our national convention in Seattle in 2000, we had a commission for horn and organ.
oh,
I'll have to
fun.
go, I'll have to go and look and see. I don't remember who the composer was. Maybe, hopefully, it was a woman composer.
Yeah, right. On my very first ever recital when I was a junior in college, way back when, I did an arrangement. I didn't do the arrangement, but I played an arrangement of water music for two horns and organ, and that was fun. That was a good time.
Great. So we may have a small but dedicated group today, but
That's
we always
fine.
get a lot of folks in the subsequent viewings. So
Perfect. That's how a lot of our presentations go too. It's small but die hard.
you can definitely tell we've evolved from the COVID days when
Hmm.
Zoom was kind of the way to connect with people, and now it's become a very convenient tool.
Right. And we also are all sick of it.
Yeah, you are correct about that too. It's like it's you really have to sell it to get folks to hop in.
It's so
Okay,
true.
so why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll go ahead and admit everyone, and we'll. It looks like we're recording. I think it said we were recording already. So, yep. Okay, here we go.
Sounds good.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is JW Arnold, and I am the Membership Marketing and Communications Specialist for the AGO. And I'm sitting in today for our Director of Education, Michelle Cardos, as your moderator or facilitator for this great session we have with Dr. Katie Beth McKinney of Boulanger Initiative. So, welcome, Katie. We'll turn it right over to you for what I know is going to be a very fascinating discussion. And if you have questions along the way, you can feel free to add them into the chat. Or I know that Katie's also allowed some time at the end for some conversation. So take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. For this is our second partnership event. The first one, if you weren't able to attend, was a Wikathon, where we sat and edited Wikipedia articles with members of AGO, focusing on women composers who wrote for organ, and that was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to being here again tonight. Like you said, I am Katie Beth McKinney. I am the research manager at Boulanger Initiative. And what that means is I manage our database that I'll talk about in a little bit, as well as some of our other projects like our Beyond the Box Into the Bar Lines book series that we publish, and our research fellows. And basically, if it has to do with the intake of information and then sometimes the sharing of it with everybody else, it's my gig. I'm also a horn player, but an organ ally. Some of my students, actually, funny enough, some of my students where I adjunct are organ primaries and horn secondaries, and that is a fun thing to have happening. So I want to tell you a little bit about Boulanger Initiative in case you aren't familiar with us. We are a nonprofit based out of the Washington, D.C. area. We've been around for 7 years now. And we have our entire mission statement is that we advocate for women and all gender marginalized composers. And we do that by fostering inclusivity and representation to expand and enrich the collective understanding of what music is, has been, and can be. We promote music composed by women through performance, education, research, consulting, and commissions. And it's a lot of things that we do. I'm going to talk very briefly about a couple of what those mean. First of which is our database that I mentioned a second ago. This is my pride and joy. It is completely free and open access. You could go to it right now at boulangerinitiative.org/database. And it is currently hosting, whoops, I went one too far, so sorry, 1,921 composers and over 20,000 works referenced. That doesn't mean we have the music itself, but we do link out if it's purchasable, if it's free on IMSLP, if you can get it on WorldCat, if you can rent it through Zinfonia. We try to provide any and all links that we can give you, as well as recordings, manuscript information, archive information. It is a positive repository of so much information, completely filterable by composer location, by instrumentation. So please go check it out. It is really a labor of love and growing all the time, which is so, so exciting. We also have consultation services. If you're ever looking to program something and need some assistance or you have a research question, we do this on a paid basis. We only charge $5 an hour for students. So if you have a student who's looking for programming a recital, we are happy to help. And we also, like I mentioned, have our Beyond the Box Into the Bar Line series. This is a collection of books. We're about to publish our next one, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be all Belle Epoque French composers. So we're looking at Cécile Chaminade and Mel Bonis. A couple of those names are going to pop up tonight, which is so great. And then we also have education programs like the one you're going to see this evening. We do online events constantly, including Wikipedia editathons and presentations like this. But we also do in-person workshops. So if you ever want to have us come visit your campus, or if you want to come to us, we have all kinds of stuff going on, as well as our annual Women Composers Festival, or WOCO Fest, which is happening next weekend at Strathmore if you happen to be in the greater DMV area. So we hope we would see you there. So why are we here this evening? If you're here, I think it's safe to assume that you understand there's a representation problem in music that is persistent even to today. We have seen changes positively, cannot argue that in any way. However, we are also seeing some stagnation in some of those changes, and we're also seeing some major pushback. And even at our peak of programming in 2020, when the Me Too movement swept through everything, we did not even come close to approaching gender equity in programming, especially places like orchestras. You just see it all the time where there's just complete imbalance of gender. And sometimes you have people who are openly hostile. So I wanted to share with you, this is an article from only 2022. So this is recent. I know it's aging, but not by that much. And it's from an online publication that sees millions of viewers and users a year. And it was talking about programming trends in orchestras and lamenting the fact that women are appearing more, essentially. So I've got a couple key quotes from this article for you. Listen closer and you will hear whispers that the only way Washington felt it could play Beethoven this year was by balancing him with Black composers. And referring to Florence Price's First Symphony, which I imagine many of us know and love. The E minor is a conservative piece with unmistakable resonances of Dvorak's New World, enjoyable enough but neither blazingly original nor noticeably relevant to these times. I strongly disagree, but music is subjective, right? And then this person really comes after Marin Alsop, which is an interesting choice to make, calling her a vibrant equality campaigner and throwing in some racist jargon as well, because he was upset that They replaced the Beethoven Ode to Joy words with rap from someone, and it just, this is the kind of thing we're fighting against. Our constant public perceptions that we are attempting to replace music by men composers, which I'm a horn player. I'm going to love Mahler forever. That's just how it is. But that's not what we're about at all. And I've got another one for you. This is from slightly even farther back, 2015. But that's not long enough ago for this kind of article, stating that there's a good reason why there are no great female composers. And a couple quotes from this one. As I write this, I'm listening to a recording that couples the piano concertos of Mr. and Mrs. Schumann. In track 3, I marvel yet again at Robert's genius. The leaping melody of the finale turns into a fugue and then a waltz, enticed by the piano into modulations that never lose their power to surprise and delight. Then comes track 4, the first movement of Clara's concerto, and within 10 seconds we know it's a dud. A bold claim. A very bold claim, and one that I think has been pretty firmly disproven in years since. But again, this was only 10 years, 11 years ago, and this is a publication that sees 2.24 million users annually. So he ended the article, and if there are no great women composers, that's because creative geniuses are rare, and in the past, so few women wrote music. I'd like to refer you back again to our database with over 1,900 composers, and we're going to hit 2,000 before 2026 is done if I have anything to say about it. There have been women writing music since the very beginning of time, and if you wanted to hear the entirety of that history, it would take a 25 series volume set and beyond. There's so much music that's been written by women and gender marginalized composers since the very beginning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I like to call issues of canonicity into our little why are we here portion of this. I'm assuming all of you have heard the term musical canon, but just in case you haven't, a musical canon refers to a collection of pieces that we find to be important for some reason and that are perpetually performed and studied and taught over and over again. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is with this fun, handy-dandy little chart that I've made for you here. Because as you might be able to tell, the musical canon is a cycle that perpetuates itself. And this is a pretty simplified version, but I'm going to break down some key points here. One of these is academia. You have professors and instructors who teach their students specific pieces of music, and then musicologists and theorists study these pieces, publish papers about them. They become something that's legitimized because there's repeat attention paid to them. And we see that play out in performing organizations as well. Ensembles and soloists repeatedly perform these pieces, audiences become familiar with them, and they become masterworks or standards. We see this, the average layperson off the street could probably sing you the theme to the Ode to Joy, from Beethoven's Ninth, or even the opening 3-note lick, which I'm not going to sing because we're recording this, for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. They are masterworks according to the popular opinion and the academic opinion. And then that's fed back into publishers because they're an economic institution. They're essentially a capitalistic institution. They are fed by supply and demand. So we have editors and authors who publish anthologies, collections, textbooks, etc. about these standard works. And those are then fed back into academia. As we know, teachers are underpaid and never have time to write their own textbooks. They're going to use what's available to them from readily approved sources that they can get easily and understand quickly because they just don't have the time. And that's completely understandable and reasonable. But when we have this perpetuating cycle, we're going to see that there are hard ways to intrude into this cycle. There's also a couple little things that feed into this as well, such as audition lists, competitions, music festivals. Those are the kind of bridging the gap between academia and performing organizations, as well as the recording industry. Obviously, if a piece gets recorded, then it has been deemed worthy of being recorded. And also, it then is able to be performed by more people because they will find it more approachable to have heard the piece previously, et cetera, et cetera. But why is the canon even a problem? First of all, and this is very, very important, canons are by their nature neither universal nor impartial. I'm quoting that directly from Dr. Marcia Citron in her incredible book, Gender and the Musical Canon, one of my game-changing, life origin-altering books that I've read. They are products of the society in which they were formed, canons. So they reflect and perpetuate the values of that society. So if we have a society that is saying that whiteness, that Europeanness, that maleness is the dominant, is the norm, is the most important, then the canon of any repertoire, literary, scientific, musical, is going to reflect those values. So instead, we make up perceived reasons for these inclusions rather than acknowledging that maybe there are factors at play that are affecting what's included, such as this phrase that I cannot stand, the test of time, which I'm going to completely brush off as nonsense. Because if you know your music history, you know that Bach was nearly forgotten for a period until he was rescued by Mendelssohn, and Mendelssohn was nearly forgotten. It's this perpetuating cycle there as well of people being rediscovered and interest reviving in them. We're seeing one with David Diamond right now, a US composer. He's having a resurgence, and it's just amazing to see this process play out. But it's not just because a composer or their music was exceptional or wonderful that they are remembered. There are a variety of variables that go into this conversation, such as, did they have children who preserved their legacy, who preserved their sheet music? An amazing composer who I'm not talking about tonight, Fernande Crook, a lot of her music was almost lost, and it's thanks to a friend of Matthew Aubin, friend of BI, Matthew Aubin, who is preserving her music and working with her children and grandchildren to preserve this music that was sitting in boxes for years and years and years. There's also matters of, if they didn't have children, like someone we're going to talk about tonight, Julia Perry, their music can get stuck in interstate court and probate court and never performed for decades because there's questions about copyright and legality. There's also matters of just literal preservation of the documents, like we've seen with Florence Price. And we see how this plays out over time. Do they have advocates who love their music and will talk about it and keep performing it? It's happening over and over again, even right now, with women composers who died as recently as the 90s, as the 2000s, where they pass, they don't have children, or their children die off young, and their music is just forgotten. I'm seeing it play out with at least 5 composers I could name right now. And if there's not a plan in place for these composers, their music gets lost, no matter how successful they were during their lifetimes. These are people who had multiple Guggenheim fellowships, people who were MacDowell residents. And so it's just not as simple as the test of time bringing stuff down to us through the ages just because it's inherently valuable. Another problem with the canon is its ability to perpetuate societal biases, such as those against race, gender, class, and of course against folk and popular and world music. We know there's an elitist problem in the world of quote-unquote classical or art music. And so we see this play out where people denigrate different genres just because they're not their own cup of tea. And it's not a matter of value, it's a matter of subjective perception. That's what music is a subjective art form. Everyone's going to have different opinions. And I see that play out in my horn playing all the time, where there are standard pieces that I can't stand, but I have friends who adore them, and that's great. It's teach their own. And that's the moral of the story of music, essentially. So just a very brief history of the canon here. I'm going to keep this super short. This concept of a list of classics only dates to the 19th century. And we have, I'm going to jump scare everybody with E.T.A. Hoffman here, who was largely responsible for the inclusion of this canon of classics, who they created this philosophical ideal of repetition, longevity, idealism during the Romantic era. And it's just the invention of the anthology kind of created this implication that there is such a thing as a masterpiece and that it is a easily identifiable object, essentially, and that there are certain conditions that qualify whether something is a masterpiece or not, but rather than a subjective, inherent, intrinsic value. They are assigning set values. It's the same conversation with absolute music versus programmatic. I could talk about this for hours. Not why we're here today. But E.T.A. Hoffman was a German romantic author, composer, critic who actually wrote the Nutcracker story, in case you're not familiar, and paved the way for romantic styles of thought regarding music and criticism. So he really valued pure autonomous instrumental music, liberated from poetic text to give it meaning, etc. So I'm going to jump through the Hoffman scare again. There you go. And talk very briefly about what is a masterpiece. According to Marcia Citron, it is a work worthy of being repeatedly performed, published, and written about, eventually acquiring a permanency comparable to a painting in a museum. It leaves a minimum, oh, according to Aaron Copland, it leaves a minimum of wall space for the showing of the works of new composers, without which the supply of future writers of masterworks is certain to dry up. And we see this play out in the fact that we even have to have new music ensembles that are specializers in this industry, because so many institutions are dedicated to performing the same 250 works repeatedly rather than giving space and giving voice to new composers. And so we see this also in the need to unassume a couple key things, which is that music was not always considered a fine art, and as we know, not all music is considered such. And we also have to think about these questions just to put in your mind as we move through this little history of women composers who wrote for organ. I'm going to give you in just a minute. Canonical agendas. Who decided what entered the canon? Where there are agendas at play, like nationalism on a political scale, commercialism and capitalistic reasons on an economic scale? And when did the score become a hallowed item? What is the music? Is it the document or the performance of the music or the composer's idea of the music? And what is important? Symphonies versus solo music, public versus domestic and private music making. And essentially, why are we assigning value to a subjective medium? And that's my want to leave you with that thought as we move through these composers, because we're going to see quite a few of these women who were award winners, who were breaking glass ceilings and busting through barriers. And then we have women who were teachers as part of their primary identity, and that is how they were remembered, as pedagogues rather than as composers. But their contributions to both worlds is equally significant, and teachers, I feel, are often looked down. Well, we know that old phrase, if you those who can't do teach. So there's this denigration of those who are instructing the next generation of musicians and composers, which is an absolutely wild thing to do. And so we're going to see a little eclectic mix here in my slides of women who were composers first, educators second, and vice versa. And then one final thought is this concept of the transience of female musical fame. Because the fact that Boulanger Initiative even needs to exist, the fact that we are still constantly rediscovering women composers like Florence Price, like Avril Coleridge Taylor, like Amy Beach. These are names I didn't learn in my mainstream musical education. I think I only learned Hildegard von Bingen, Clara Schumann, and Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel during my undergraduate music history studies. But they've been around this entire time, and there are people who have known about them. There's been scholarship about them that was written as early as the 80s, as the 70s, as the 60s, beyond. But we have to keep doing this work over and over again. And why is that? There's a great quote from Elaine Showalter in the Cambridge Companion to Women Composers. Thus, each generation of women writers has found itself, in a sense, without a history, forced to rediscover the past anew. So in an ideal world, I wouldn't need to be here giving this presentation to you tonight, because we would just know these composers as part of our mainstream music education. But until we can interrupt that canonical formation and perpetuation of that cycle and start inserting women into the conversation in an equitable, half of humanity level amount, we're just going to keep doing this work over and over again. This is an article that I found in, I believe it was Etude magazine from November 1918, so well over 100 years ago. And they are talking about women's hour of glory in the music world. How many of us ever stop to think that it has come within our span of years to live through the most thrilling moments of all the centuries? And yet, when I was in school, we were taught women didn't compose. But here we had an entire, this 1918 November issue, was entirely dedicated to women composers. Theodora Dutton, Amy Beach. You can find it on archive.org. It's free to go and peruse. It's absolutely fascinating. And you can see this deep history of just women in the US, let alone women across Europe and all the rest of the world. When we do our big, massive Where Are the Women summer productions that are 4 days long, I go through the Renaissance and I go through medieval era. And there's women from South America who are writing music during the Baroque period and the Renaissance. And it just goes to show they've been here the whole time. So I'm going to jump now into the really fun part, which is talking about women who wrote for the organ. And I've tried to pick a selection of composers who I feel are maybe less known. I might be wrong. The organ canon is different than the French horn canon, so I never am quite sure who knows who anymore. And my perception of who knows which women composers is completely skewed because I spend every day embedded in this world. And so people who I think about constantly, other people have never heard of. So this should be fun. Hopefully these are some new faces and new names to familiarize yourself with. So I'm starting in the classical era, circa 1750 to 1820. We know those genre years are mushy, but with and I'm going to warn you now, I don't speak French. I'm from Texas, so please forgive me as I try to pronounce any of the French names we're going to go through tonight. Caroline Bossier Boutini, who was born in Geneva, Switzerland. And her father was a renowned physician and lover of music. And in a trend that we're going to see across this first generation of composers, the women who survived, whose records survived, whose music survived, often came from influential and affluential families because they could afford to give them access to education, and the women didn't have to work for a living, so they had the freedom and the space to compose. They had resources and they had access. So she was very lucky. Her parents encouraged her education, and her upper class status gave her that access and security to compose. She began playing piano in her family's salons from a very young age. And when she was 20, she even wrote in her diary, and here's where the French is really going to make it or break it. J'ai consacré un tiers de ma vie à la musique. It was not as bad as it could have been. Basically, I dedicated a third of my life to music. And this is a really important thing about her because even when she married, when she was 22, to another member of the gentry, Auguste Bossier, in a way that is fascinatingly common and uncommon to women composers whose music survived from this period, her husband was supportive and let her do what she wanted to do, which let her is a fascinating phrase in this context. But she was able to write music freely, even with the responsibilities of running the household and being a member of the aristocracy. But that came with strings. She would never have been allowed to perform publicly. Any performances were in intimate chamber-style settings to invited audiences, music societies, something of that nature. But a ticket-paying audience, like we would expect to see of like Yu Wang, never would come across her world. But luckily, like I said, her husband was supportive, partially because he was an avid violinist himself. So he was in the music world even as he was doing his aristocratic, managing of agricultural lands, et cetera, et cetera. What's really fascinating about Caroline is that we don't have any confirmed records of her instructors. So it seems increasingly likely that she was more or less an autodidact. She was devouring books, devouring music, and teaching herself as she went, which is really kind of fascinating. I have a picture on the screen here for you of an excerpt of one of her piano works that's undated, but I wanted you to see one of her manuscripts and how busy it is. It's a very intense work for piano here. This is a lot of black ink on the pages, we would say. And this is not light music. This is someone who is skilled at a keyboard performing this work, writing this work. Her surviving repertoire is also fascinating because it's mostly instrumental works rather than songs or vocal pieces, including a fair number of pieces for piano, a trio for piano, clarinet, and bassoon, several piano concertos, and the following piece for organ, which I'll play in a second. But it's very interesting to see someone who was active in the Swiss salon scene not writing songs as her primary mode, especially in this period. That was one of the only genres in which women were tolerated. So we see this playing out as she's writing this keyboard and interesting music. And there's women who came before who lived in that world as well, like Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre during the Baroque period. But any woman who stepped out of the prescribed song, especially after, when we enter the Romantic era, we're going to see backlash play out against that. She also did manage to get published. She signed a contract with Le Duc, which is a French publisher who also published quite a few women composers out of Paris. And she was an extremely early adopter of the practice of incorporating folk music into her works well before the capital R Romantics began to do so, which is very, very fun. So I'm going to share with you a little piece of her 1818 work called Piece for Organ. I'm not going to try and say that one in French. Here's that for you. I really enjoyed listening to that as I was picking out these clips for this evening. That was one of my favorites. So much fun for me as non-organist to listen to something from that era of organ music because I don't find myself in the classical area of organ very often. So that was a fun time. We're going to jump into the Romantic period now. The woman named Clémence de Grandval. She was a French composer born in Saint-Rémy-des-Monts, which is a small commune in the northwest of France. And like our previous composer, was born into a well-to-do family. Once again, status came with resources and access, and she was able to study with Friedrich Flotow, Frédéric Chopin, and Camille Saint-Saëns, and even married into a Viscount aristocratic family. And once again, had a husband who at least tolerated her work, and so she was able to continue composing. And again, this came with strings attached once more. So she actually published under a wide variety of pseudonyms. One, two, three, four different pseudonyms. Pseudonyms, excuse me. And you can see here on the screen, actually on the far right, I've got a manuscript for you, or not a manuscript, but a published piece that's held at the Library of Congress. And you can see one of her pseudonyms there, Caroline Blangy. I'm sure that wouldn't have been pronounced that way, but that's one of the names. She also published under Clémence Valgrand, Marie Félicité de Ressé, and Maria Ressé de Tessier. And on the left, this is a very cool little historical moment. You can see one of her pieces published, a mass, which is dedicated, if you read up to the very top, to a certain G. Bizet. And you can even see on the screen here, I've circled it for you, his ownership stamp that says Georges Bizet right there. So this is Bizet's copy of her piece that she gifted to him. She was well connected. She was friends with everyone in the Parisian salon scene. And so we saw quite a few publications from her, and her music was being performed very, very often. And once again, after she passed, she lost notoriety. There was no one around to continue performing her music. No one advocated for her, and her name was almost lost once again. She was connected to Saint-Saëns, like I said. He dedicated a piece to her, as did Charles Gounod and Pauline Viardot Garcia. So that's a really cool connection of women supporting women there. Another interesting note, she was both a spiritualist and a vegetarian. So she was a little bit of an oddball and eccentric within her society circles. Her works are extremely varied in genre and content, ranging from 6 operas to a mass, Stabat Mater cantata, oboe concerto songs, and an impressive array of chamber music. So she's a very prolific composer. So I've got here for you a little clip of her short mass from 1867. What's fascinating to me about this is the much less angry Kyrie than many others you would hear, I think, in canonical masses and things of that nature. And this is a setting of the Catholic liturgy, which was broken into 4 movements in this case: the Kyrie, the Offertoire, O Solitaires, and Agnus Dei. And the rest of the piece is wonderful and all up on YouTube, so you can go check it out. So we're going to skip now over into Sweden. And this is a composer who is experiencing a resurgence right now, Frida Andre. And I'm so excited to see her name popping up more and more. In fact, I live in Baltimore. The Baltimore Symphony is performing one of her pieces next year. I cannot wait. And we just published a blog by one of our external writers on the BI website if you want to go and learn even more about her. But she was born in Visby, Sweden. And she was an absolutely trailblazing composer, organist, and conductor. And she literally changed the laws of her country to allow her to work as a professional organist. Until 1861, when she and her father lobbied the government repeatedly and intervened in this process, unmarried women over the age of 25 were not allowed to hold permanent church organ positions. She knew that's what she wanted to do with her life, and she got the laws changed, which is just beyond incredible. I'm putting the cart a little bit before the horse here. I'm going to return back to her earlier years. She was very lucky to be born to parents who believed deeply in education for all of their children, not just their sons. She and her sister Frederica both received outstanding educations, and by the time she was 14, she was enrolled at the Music Conservatory in Stockholm. And she studied both composition and organ there and became the first woman to pass the organ examinations in all of Sweden. She just was constantly the first in almost everything she was doing. Pretty groundbreaking. She became the organist of the Gothenburg Cathedral in 1867, which was a position she held for the rest of her life. And in another first, she was the first woman in Sweden to conduct a symphony orchestra when she became the leader of the Gothenburg Workers' Institute concerts in 1897. Perhaps unsurprisingly, much of her compositional output features the organ, including 2 organ symphonies, 2 fully orchestrated symphonies, an opera, and 2 masses in Swedish as well, quite a bit of chamber music and songs as well, and a lot of that music incorporates the organ. So what I've pulled for you today is a little bit of her first organ symphony from 1890, and I picked an interesting clip. Sometimes I like to play the beginning, sometimes something in the middle. This is the transition between the third and fourth movements, because I think what she did here was fascinating. Yeah, it doesn't get much more satisfying than that big resolution of that scale moving up into that huge chord for the finale. And this is one I haven't listened to in its entirety yet, and I'm very excited to go back and give it a full listen through. We're going to keep moving now back to France. There seem to be some French organ epicenters going on there in Paris, which is perhaps surprising to no one here well versed in their organ history. But we've got Mel Moniz, who lived from 1858 to 1937. She is our first woman in my presentation not to come from an upper class family, maybe with the exception of Frida Andre, but she was certainly well established. Mel, on the other hand, came from a lower middle class family. They were very religious, and there was nothing in her home life that encouraged her musical interests. This is the first person who's doing this on their own with not a lot of familial support, in fact, some familial hostility. And we're seeing that it impacts their careers. They have to work much harder. They have to really fight to get anything published, to get into the world of music. But she had a fascinating childhood, and she was astonished to learn, accordingly to her, that the music she heard in a church when she came to worship was made by mere mortals singing in a choir, and not, as she had imagined, the voice of God and the angels. So she was clearly very influenced by music upon hearing it seriously for the first time. And through some kind of happy accident, her family acquired a piano, and she taught herself to play. Much like we saw earlier, she was a little bit of an autodidact. She begged her family to study with a teacher repeatedly, and finally, when she was 12, her family agreed she could have music lessons. And soon after, she began to compose and was introduced to the respected music professor César Franck, whose name you might know, and he encouraged her compositions. So she finally found someone who was willing to provide her support and any kind of allyship, essentially. Women were finally allowed to study at the Paris Conservatory by this time, and she was even classmates with Claude Debussy. So a little bit of well-connected lifespan going on here. She immediately won first prize in harmony and second prize in accompaniment while at the conservatory, and would have liked to continue at school and would no doubt have gotten a prize in composition, but her parents forced her to withdraw before she was allowed to do so. She had made the mistake of falling in love with one of her classmates who was a singer and poet and thoroughly unsuitable to her family. So she was forced to come home, essentially. And they wound up arranging a marriage to her to a wealthy widower named Albert Domage. And they wound up being a relatively unhappy marriage. He was not supportive of her music making in any way. And for nearly a decade, she was unable to find time or energy for composition because she was rearing his 4 or 5 children he already had. And during these times, she dutifully fulfilled her responsibilities, running the household, entertaining, caring for the children, but composition was thoroughly on the back burner. However, in the 1890s, she reconnected with her childhood sweetheart from school, who was by then a respected professional musician. And he encouraged her musical interests, helped her connect with publishers, inspired her to devote herself to composition. And they had a child together, although they were not able to acknowledge this publicly for obvious reasons. And their daughter, Madeline, was raised by another family until she was well within her teens, and then eventually came to live with Melanie as her adopted goddaughter, but it wasn't until years later that she learned who her real parents were. Another fascinating thing about Bonise is that she did not use her husband's name for compositions. You might have clocked that she's known as Mel Bonise and not Madame Dommage, although she did see that socially. When it came to her compositions, she was always Mel Bonise. And part of that was so that she could remain androgynous in the eyes of music publishers. That's why she didn't use Melanie, her full name. But it also is a sign that she was trying to establish her own career as her own human self. And I think that's always a fascinating time when women were able to do so. So here I have a little clip for you from one of her pieces by our very own co-founder of Boulanger Initiative, Joy Leilani Garbett, performing on the organ here. And this is a beautiful piece of music. It certainly falls within that French style of composition, and it really is just stunning. And I really hope that I'll get to hear that live at some point as well. We're going to shift now to Croatia, to Dora Pejevic. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly either, so everyone, please forgive me. She was another member of the aristocracy and nobility. She was a countess. Her full name was Maria Theodora Paulina Pejevic, also known as Dora. Are we noticing the aristocracy theme yet? Like Elfriede Andre, she was a woman of firsts. Her symphony in F sharp minor is considered to be the first modern Croatian symphony by anyone of any gender. And she was born in Budapest to a noble family. Her mother was a Hungarian noblewoman and was both a skilled pianist and singer, and no doubt influenced her daughter's education pretty heavily. Dora was a bit of a hellion who resisted the standard aristocratic lifestyle expected of her, even writing in a letter about how she didn't agree with many of her class's beliefs about status and work. She said, "I don't understand how one can live without work. However, it's true that I don't align with members of my social class. In everything, I seek substance and value, and neither norms nor traditions nor lineage can blind me with sand in my eyes." And we see this play out throughout her life. She was also an autodidact, devoured everything she could get her hands on, from literature to philosophy, science, and religion, and of course, music. In 1913, she wrote a piano concerto, making her the first Croatian, again, of any gender, to write a concerto of any kind. And like many other composers, you can trace the impact of the start of World War I directly onto her composition style. And she abandoned the German Romanticism that was so popular and then started embracing Impressionism and Expressionism into her musical stylings. And she even served as a paramedic in the war. So that certainly would have been bucking the system a little bit of what was expected to her. So now, what's really tragic, though, about her life, you may notice her lifespan was fairly brief. She died from childbirth complications in 1923 when she was only 38 years old. And we have a letter that she'd left behind where she wrote to her husband, where she seemed to have some kind of premonition that she was going to die, and implored him to provide the child that was coming freedom, regardless of their gender, saying, "May God grant that our child, if I were to leave it to you, brings you joy, that they become a truly open, great human being, pave their paths, but never prevent them from experiencing the suffering that enriches the soul, for only then will they become a person. Let them develop like a plant, and if they possess great talent, provide them with everything that can serve their development. Above all, give them freedom wherever it may be required. For dependence on parents and relatives crushes many talents. I know this from my own experience, and therefore treat them equally, whether it be a girl or a boy. And I just think that's an absolutely beautiful letter that she wrote to her husband. And even in her short lifespan, she composed over 100 compositions, including the chamber work I'm going to share with you. This was originally for violin, soprano, and organ, but here we have a lovely arrangement for flute instead of violin of Fajacevich's Ave Maria. Oh, it cut off before the last chord. So sorry. Go listen to the rest. That's your teaser. Because then the soprano comes in and it's just so, so beautiful. We're going to keep moving. And this is going to be a composer who I will be shocked if any of you have heard of. She has become one of my pet projects in the last couple of years. She's behind my head here. Her name is Radie Britton. She is a United States, or was a United States composer born in my home state of Texas. And she's what I'm going to consider the first of my truly deep cut composers this evening. And she was very active at the turn of the 20th century when American classical music identity was evolving from its beginnings in the Second New England School with Amy Beach. And centers of culture were spreading outward from the East Coast and towards California and through Chicago. And it was no longer completely centralized in Boston and New York. So we're seeing, and Philadelphia, of course. So we're seeing migration points for composers. So she was born on a tiny ranch in West Texas and spent many of her formative years in Amarillo. And if you know that city, not at the time, not exactly a hub of musical culture back then. It was definitely not Chicago. And so she had to beg her very conservative religious father to allow her to study in Chicago at the American Conservatory, where she became friends with a Dr. Albert Nolte, who kind of took her under his wing and encouraged her to compose music and took her to Germany, where she experienced walking through the Black Forest for the first time and had this big spiritual awakening, and it affected every composition she wrote. But much of her style is very Americana focused. So you get works like Cactus Rhapsody and Cowboy Rhapsody and Heroic Poem, which was dedicated to Charles Lindbergh. And here I have a picture of a letter for you, actually, that was given. Funny enough, this is a screenshot from eBay where it used to live, but was given to me as a Christmas gift by one of my coworkers, so I now own this letter, which is very fun for me. And she talks about how she wrote 257 pieces. You can see that here in her cursive in 1989. And she was just an absolutely fascinating woman who moved out to Hollywood after living in Chicago and Indiana and different places, and just took her career into her own hands and was being performed by orchestras like the Moscow Symphony and the LA Philharmonic and different organizations around there. But when she passed in 1984, people just forgot about her. And so I am on a personal mission to rejuvenate her reputation, get her music performed again. And so you're hearing about her tonight as well. But she also happened to write this absolutely stunning piece called Lament for Violin and Organ that I'd never listened to before preparing for this presentation. And I thoroughly enjoyed. this is down one of my all-time favorite pieces. I think it's so great. It's very cinematic, and it's funny because it's one of her earlier works, but you find that playing out where when she's moved to Hollywood, more of her stuff becomes very, neo-romantic, and you get those big sweeping kind of sounds. And I think you can hear the premonitions of that in this piece, which is so, so great. We're going to go now to another deep cut composer, Lotte Bacchus, and I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that correct. Could be very wrong. She was a German composer, and she was brand new to me before preparing this presentation, but I found her life to be absolutely fascinating. I'm going to quick check the quote. There's definitely a Hammond B3. Great, I love that. The Hammond organs are so fun, and I don't know enough about them, but the sound is so signature. It's great. So Lade, despite her massive success and renown in Germany and throughout Europe, it doesn't seem like her music has traveled to the US very much yet. I only recently became familiar with her. She was both an organist and pianist, as well as composer. That seems to be a bit of a trend with women who wrote a lot for the organs that they played the instrument. She studied piano in Strasbourg from 1915 to 1917, and then afterwards in Dusseldorf. And she developed an international reputation as a pianist and particularly as an interpreter of Liszt's music, but her attention turned to composition beginning in 1935 when she studied at the Prussian Academy of Arts with George Schumann and Max Trapp. She lived in Berlin beginning in 1931, meaning she was there throughout World War II. She lived there until the end of her life. But because her works primarily focused on religious and Catholic music, she seems to have been able to kind of stay under the radar of the Nazi regime. She certainly got a lot of negative reviews, however, so it seems like she was not one of their darlings by any means, but she was permitted to continue her activities. But they also, anytime she got any kind of positive press, they omitted her first name. So it would have just been Bacchus, because having a woman composer certainly did not fit into the Nazi prescription of Kinder, Küche, and Kirche, or children, kitchen, and church. In 1945, this is super tragic, all of her compositions she had written prior to that year were destroyed in a fire during the Battle of Berlin. So she lost two operas, a symphony, and an oratorio, as well as a myriad of other pieces. And I think she lost almost all of her music at that point. And she was essentially forced to start over as a composer. But this was kind of a weird break for her in that it allowed her to completely reevaluate her composition style and kind of forced her to look at what she was writing. So we see that after the war ended, she suddenly starts being free to experiment with modernism and other techniques. And you're going to hear this in her work for organ that I'm going to share with you in a second, Et Spiritus Dei Ferabatur Super Aquas, which was composed much later in her career in 1973. And you're going to hear a lot of dissonance, and it's going to be very different than anything we've heard prior to now. Also of note, she was the founder and director of the Berlin Chamber Choir Association, formed in 1945, and according to Berlin scholars, was instrumental in the reconstruction of Berlin's public musical life after the Second World War. So she was a very important figure over there. I don't know why we haven't heard of her much over here, but I'm very excited to share this piece with you. Yeah, it's definitely a huge shift from Lady Britain's neo-romanticism going on in the U.S. I'm going to keep plugging along before I run out of time. I'm really excited to share with you a name who I'm also seeing come up more and more, Undine Smith-Moore. She was another United States composer who was known as the Dean of Black Women Composers throughout the country, and is remembered more today for her choral and vocal music, but she also composed chamber and other instrumental works. And she is one of the very few and rare women, alongside Nadia Boulanger and the like, who are remembered and given respect for their pedagogy and their impact on others around them, as opposed to being written off as the historical narrative as just being a teacher. She was born Undine Eliza Anna Smith and was the granddaughter of enslaved persons in the American South. Her father worked on a plantation before the Civil War and then worked for the Norfolk and Western Railroad as a brakeman. And her mother was both a keen reader and lover of music, and she clearly encouraged this in Undine, who began studying piano when she was only 7 years old. She then attended Fisk University to continue studying piano, and this is where she first began composing. She was part of the movement known as the Harlem Renaissance while she attended Columbia University beginning in 1931, where she earned her master's degree and professional diploma, and then studied with Howard Murphy at the Manhattan School of Music from 1952 to 1953. And her teachers all wanted her to continue on with her studies and attend Juilliard, but instead she decided to enter the workforce and began working in public schools in North Carolina, and then took different positions at different colleges throughout Virginia, teaching counterpoint, theory, piano, and organ, as well as running choirs and other positions as needed. She taught at so many different colleges throughout her life, and she touched so many lives that she was recognized by the National Black Caucus and even gave the keynote at the National Congress on Women in Music at NYU in 1981. Her style of composition during her school years initially did not engage with themes of Blackness or African American identity, but after 1953, she underwent what she called a marked change in style, and she began transcribing melodies that her mother sang for her and began incorporating African American spirituals into her music. But you're going to hear this play out in a very different way than composers like Margaret Bonds and Florence Price, who remained firmly rooted in tonality. This is a much more avant-garde interpretation of spirituals and is a lot of fun to listen to. So this is going to be variations on There Is a Fountain, and I'm just going to play the theme for you, but even you can hear the harmonies being so much more modern than some of the other women composers we hear at the time. I'm going to beg you all to go and listen to the variations because what she does with them is incredible. So if this is a new to you piece, please go check it out. And even if it's not, it's fantastic. So I'm going to wrap up my composer focuses here with one more composer for you whose name is also experiencing a resurgence in notoriety in the US right now, which could not thrill me more. Julia Perry, who was raised in Akron, Ohio, and was a deeply celebrated composer during her lifetime. And I don't even have time to go through all of the things that she won, other than mentioning that she was twice over Guggenheim Fellow and studied with Nadia Boulanger and had this illustrious pedigree as a composer. But by the time she passed, only in 1979, she was still really young, her music had fallen out of favor because she wasn't composing in the styles that were popular at the time. And in, I believe it was 1974, year might be wrong, she suffered the first of a series of strokes, and this paralyzed her on her right side. And she was so dedicated to her music that she learned how to write with her left hand so she could continue composing. And she was still sending her music off to publishers up until her death, like the Southern Music Company, who's defunct, so we can name and shame them, who dismissed her, claiming they were too busy doing music inventory to accept her submissions, which is just wild. She and her mother both died within 3 years of each other, and so there was no one left to preserve her music, like I mentioned earlier, and many of her pieces were lost or destroyed or stuck in interstate court. And there are some amazing scholars and projects like the African Diaspora Music Project who are working to get her music out of that court system. And so we're seeing more and more of her music being published. Check out Boozy and Hawks is finally working and getting some of her stuff as well. So she was only 55 when she passed, and she wrote experimental music with pantonality. And I don't think it's a coincidence that her popularity also died off after the civil rights movement when she started incorporating more Black themes into her music, because up till then she had been what they called a serious composer and wrote in the, neoclassical style. But then when she had this crisis of conscience in the 60s, she changed and started incorporating more and suddenly was less popular. So again, don't think that was a coincidence. But I want to share with you one of her works from 1952 that she wrote called Ye Who Seek the Truth. It's so much more tonal than many of the other works that I know of hers. Of particular, my favorites are also her Stabat Mater and a Short Piece for Orchestra, both of which are outstanding pieces of music. So we have run out of time and come to the end, but I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts about what can you do to help us continue this work and continue to get the women who wrote music into the spotlight and out of obscurity. And the first of these is to just be curious. There's so much music out there and so much of it is fantastic. And I have fallen in love with so many composers whose stories I've learned in the last couple of years. It never ends. So we are going to continue doing this and continue adding to our database. And it's a great place to start with curiosity. We also encourage you to be part of commissions, consortiums, and composition efforts with living composers, because that's so important to encourage the next generations. I'm going to skip my clips because there's no time, which is so sad. Get involved with us. We have a submit a work and a submit a composer form on our database. We love when people help us fill that out. This is a nonstop job. My fellows and I are constantly adding, and we never have enough time, and we can't track down everything with just the three of us. So we'd love your help. Feel free to submit. I've got a little red circle there for you. And like I mentioned, we do monthly Wikathons. We're going to have one in May and another one in June coming up, where you can learn how to edit Wikipedia. No experience required. I will teach you how to do it. And I provide research for you so you don't have to track it all down yourself. And we just fix articles. Sometimes it's just grammar fixes. And then definitely help us share the news about everything that's out in the world. We've got so many new resources coming out, books and albums that are myriad of scholars and performers giving. So help share the word, what your friends are up to that have to do with anything like this. It's very cool. And last but not least, you can donate to us at boulangerinitiative.org/donate. That was hard to say. And we also have very cool merch if you're interested in posters and t-shirts and the like, and our books. And they're gorgeous because our in-house artist who does all of these illustrations is incredible, and I cannot sing her praises enough. So I've hit us right up to the time, but if anyone has any questions or thoughts, I would love for you to unmute or type in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer anything I can. Or just if there were any new pieces. I'd love to know if anyone was brand new.
That was a wonderful presentation. All of the pieces were new to me.
Oh, great.
I'm presenting a women composers concert in November, and I have a specific question about Margaret Vardell Sandreski. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I have.
She was born in 1921, and I can't find anywhere an obituary. So
Fascinating.
I think she's still alive. If she is, she's 104. But I am fascinated by her mass, Misa Mon Armée. It is an incredible piece. And I also understood that she composed a Magnificat for solo soprano and organ, and I can't find it anywhere. And I'm wondering if you would have suggestions as to how to locate that piece.
That is a great question. I'm going to drop my email in the chat so we can discuss more, because now I'm going to want to know. So I'm going to put that in there right now. You can copy and paste that initiative. I have to sound it out every time. So yeah, initial places to start. Yeah. Do we know if she held any faculty positions anywhere or any kind of institutional position? Because that's where I would go first.
She did work at Oberlin, which is my alma mater.
Okay, so that's where I would start and see if they know of anybody who is connected to her still. There's also archivegrid.org, which is a fantastic repository of archives in the United States, and you can search and see if her papers have been left anywhere. It's only a participating institution, so it's not comprehensive by any means, but it's definitely a fantastic starting place. And I know I've heard her name, so I'm going to have to do some digging as well, because now I'm going to be very deeply curious. Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. Anyone else? Did everyone else enjoy the Rady Britain piece as much as I did? Good.
Katie, it looks like in the chat, Doris has asked if Boulanger Initiative sells any sheet music.
Oh, that's a great question. We do not. We are in discussions with different publishers. So if anyone's looking to publish something they've written, we've got some recommendations for you who are doing things of that nature. What we do is we link out to if someone has sheet music for sale. I should also have mentioned our database is only non-living composers right now, because that would require an entire another staff member full time to try and expand that record. But we do link to anything that we can provide free or for sale through any of our records. But as of this exact moment, we don't sell anything, at least sheet music wise.
Well, great. If there are no more questions, on behalf of the AGO and our IDEA committee, that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, I'd just like to thank you, Dr. McKinney, for being with us and providing such a fascinating overview of these composers that I know everyone who watched is going to want to do a little research and explore for themselves and discover. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude our webinar tonight, and the recording will be made available on the AGO website. And I believe we'll also be able to send it out to everyone who registered online for the presentation. So if they weren't able to attend us live, they'll still have that opportunity to enjoy the presentation. So with that, thank you, Dr. McKinney, and
Thank you so much.
thank you all for being with us. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.